When Gloria Maxwell sauntered into the lobby of Pinecrest Mountain Resort with her designer luggage and that signature look of disdain, I simply smiled from behind the reception desk, adjusted my manager's badge, and whispered to my assistant, "Let the show begin." Her perfectly highlighted hair swayed as she surveyed the grand lobby with its soaring timber beams and massive stone fireplace, completely oblivious to my presence as she complained loudly about the quaint decor to my eye. Father-in-law, the Christmas tree towering in the center of the space, which I had personally decorated with hand-blown glass ornaments from local artisans, was apparently charming in a rustic sort of way. My husband James squeezed my hand under the counter, our private signal that had developed over 10 years of marriage. A silent reminder, patience would make the revelation all the sweeter. "They've put us in the Aspen suite," Gloria announced to the small gathering of Maxwell family members streaming through the entrance. "It's supposedly their finest accommodation, though I can't imagine it compares to the Ritz in Aspen where we usually stay. If you're enjoying this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I'll be sharing the 5 subtle ways I turned my grandmother's failing mountain inn into the exclusive resort that just made Condé Nast's gold list, while keeping my ownership completely anonymous to my in-laws for 8 years. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The irony of Gloria Maxwell criticizing my life's work while standing in the lobby of the resort I had painstakingly built from near bankruptcy wasn't lost on me, especially since she had spent the past decade dismissing my career as playing hotelier and had explicitly uninvited me from the Maxwell family Christmas gathering just 3 weeks earlier. "The holidays are for family, Sarah," she had said during our last disastrous dinner at their Westlake mansion. "And while you're technically family on paper, your constant work excuses have made it clear where your priorities lie. Besides, James needs time with his real family without distractions." By distractions, Gloria meant my military background, my lack of social pedigree, and my insistence on maintaining a career rather than focusing solely on producing grandchildren for the Maxwell dynasty. The fact that I'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Corps of Engineers officer before using my skills to renovate and manage hospitality properties was, in her view, unsettling dinner conversation. What she didn't know, what none of the Maxwells knew except James, was that I didn't just manage Pinecrest Mountain Resort, I owned it, completely. The property had been my grandmother's struggling inn before I transformed it into the most exclusive mountain destination in 3 states. I had kept my ownership private, working through a management company where I held the position of regional director, specifically to maintain professional boundaries. That separation had served me well until Gloria decided that my work commitment was a personal affront to her family values and social calendar. "Mother, you look lovely," James said, stepping out from behind the reception desk to embrace Gloria. "The drive up wasn't too challenging, I hope?" Gloria patted her son's cheek with manicured fingers. "Dreadful, darling. The roads are barely maintained in this wilderness. I don't know why you insisted we try this new resort instead of our usual place." "Sometimes change is refreshing," James replied, catching my eye with the slightest wink. "You're always saying we should support local businesses." Richard Maxwell, my father-in-law, was already examining the stone fireplace with surprising appreciation. A retired architect, he had a genuine respect for craftsmanship that occasionally transcended his wife's social prejudices. "Impressive stonework," he murmured. "Montana granite?" "Idaho, actually," I answered before I could stop myself, momentarily, forgetting I was playing the part of resort manager rather than proud owner. Gloria's gaze finally landed on me, though recognition didn't immediately register. I had changed my usual professional business casual for the full manager's uniform, charcoal suit with the discreet resort pine tree logo embroidered on the lapel. My military-honed posture and confident stance were a far cry from the slouchy daughter-in-law she frequently criticized. "Sarah?" The confusion in her voice was almost comical. "What on earth are you doing here? I thought you were too busy with work to join us for Christmas." I maintained my professional smile. Welcome to Pinecrest Mountain Resort, Mrs. Maxwell. I'm the property manager. We're delighted to have you staying with us for the holidays. Gloria's perfectly composed face froze somewhere between shock and suspicion. This is where you work? This exact resort? James, did you know about this? My husband's innocent shrug deserved an acting award. I mentioned Sarah works in hospitality management. What a coincidence, right? Madeline and David, James's sister, and brother-in-law, exchanged glances that suggested they found the situation far more amusing than Gloria did. Their twin teenagers, attached to their phones as usual, remained oblivious to the family drama unfolding. Well, this is awkward, Gloria finally managed, adjusting her cashmere scarf. I suppose we can make the best of it. Though I must say, Sarah, it seems rather unprofessional to be working during Christmas when family is gathering. The hypocrisy was breathtaking considering she had specifically uninvited me from that very gathering. I maintained my composure. Years of military discipline serving me well. Actually, Mrs. Maxwell, I've arranged for Daniel here to handle the front desk duties during your stay so I can join family activities whenever possible. I gestured to my assistant manager, who nodded pleasantly. We prioritize work-life balance for our staff, especially during the holidays. Gloria's eyes narrowed slightly at having her criticism so neatly sidestepped. How fortunate. I assume you can still arrange for our dinner reservations at 7. The Alpine dining room, I believe? Of course, though I took the liberty of reserving the private dining room instead. The views of the valley at sunset are spectacular, and I thought the family might appreciate the privacy. Richard nodded appreciatively. Thoughtful, Sarah. Thank you. I could tell Gloria was recalibrating, unsure how to maintain her dismissive attitude toward me while simultaneously expecting premium service as a resort guest. James squeezed my hand again beneath the counter, this time a little longer. Perhaps you could show us to our suite now, Gloria suggested with forced pleasantness. The drive was quite taxing. Certainly, if you'll follow me. As I led the Maxwell family across the lobby toward the elevator, I caught snippets of their whispered conversations behind me. Did you know about this? Madeline hissed to James. Sort of, my husband replied, amusement evident in his voice. Mom looks like she swallowed a lemon, one of the twins giggled. I pressed the private elevator button that accessed only the top-tier suites, using my master key card. As the doors closed on our group, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of satisfaction at the confused respect now showing on Richard's face and the barely concealed annoyance on Gloria's. For years, they had dismissed my career as an inconvenient hobby, never bothering to visit any property I managed or showing interest in my professional accomplishments. The Aspen Suite features a private hot tub on the balcony overlooking the ski slopes, I explained as we ascended. We've stocked the refrigerator with your preferred champagne, Mr. Maxwell, and arranged for the chef to prepare Gloria's favorite, macarons. You've been paying attention, Richard noted with surprise. It's my job to attend to details, I replied simply. The elevator opened directly into the suite's foyer, revealing the stunning great room beyond with its wall of windows, showcasing the snow-covered mountains. A fire was already crackling in the stone fireplace, and tasteful Christmas decorations adorned the space, elegant but not ostentatious, exactly as I had specified. This is... Gloria seemed momentarily at a loss for words as she took in the luxurious space. Actually quite lovely. The master bedroom is through those double doors, I continued. Madeline and David, your suite connects through the hallway to the left, with the twins' room adjacent. We've set up the Christmas tree in the common area as requested, and there's a fully stocked bar in the corner. What I didn't mention was that I had personally designed this suite when renovating the property 3 years ago, incorporating elements I knew would appeal to even the most discerning guests. The artwork featured local artists, the furniture was handcrafted by regional woodworkers, and the stonework had been completed by a veteran-owned company I'd met through my military connections. As the family dispersed to explore their accommodations, James hung back with me near the elevator. "You're enjoying this a little too much," he whispered, his eyes crinkling with barely suppressed laughter. "I haven't even started yet," I replied quietly. "Wait until she finds out about the Christmas Eve gala." The Maxwell family settled into their suite while I retreated to my office on the mezzanine level, a space strategically positioned to overlook both the main lobby and the resort's expansive rear windows facing the mountains. It was my sanctuary and command center, designed with the same military precision I'd applied to forward operating bases. Everything I needed within reach, nothing superfluous. The wall of monitors displayed various resort operations, the kitchen preparing for dinner service, guests enjoying the indoor pool, the ski lift operations running smoothly despite the light snowfall that had begun. My office contained one personal touch that always centered me during stressful moments: a shadow box displaying my medals and unit patches from my military service, alongside a faded photograph of my grandmother standing proudly in front of the original Pinecrest Inn 30 years ago. The contrast between the decorated army captain and the determined woman who had built a small mountain hospitality business with nothing but grit always reminded me where my strength came from. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Emily, my head of guest services, entered with a knowing smile. "So that's the famous mother-in-law?" she asked, handing me a tablet with the evening's reservation details. "She's exactly as you described. Down to the passive-aggressive hair flip," I confirmed, scanning the information. "Everything set for tonight?" "Chef Marcel is preparing the 7-course menu you approved with the wine pairings Mr. Reynolds selected last week. The private dining room is decorated with the subtle elegance theme, heavy on the pine boughs and white lights. And yes, we've arranged for Gloria's place setting to have the slightly wobbly chair as requested." I laughed. "I was joking about the chair." "I wasn't," Emily replied with a straight face. "Small victories, Sarah." After Emily left, I called James, who answered in a hushed tone. "They're all unpacking. Mom's already complained about the thread count of the sheets, which I know for a fact are the same Egyptian cotton ones she has at home. Is she still planning the Christmas Eve family-only dinner?" I asked. The question that had been bothering me since Gloria had announced her intention to have a private family celebration on Christmas Eve, the same night as the resort's annual holiday gala, which I was required to host. "She's been on the phone with the concierge for 15 minutes trying to arrange it," he confirmed. "Apparently she's insisting on a private chef in the suite." "Interesting, since we're fully booked and all our culinary staff is committed to the gala." I tapped, my pen against the desk, considering options. "Let me guess, she's also asking about changing your sister's family to connecting rooms on a different floor?" "How did you know?" "Because the Larkspur suite next to yours was reserved months ago by the Johnsons, her arch rivals from the country club." I'd recognized the name immediately when the reservation came through. Gloria would rather displace her own daughter than risk running into Marjorie Johnson in the hallway. James sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if you married me just to study my family like a bizarre anthropological experiment." "Your bone structure didn't hurt either," I teased. "Listen, I need to check on dinner preparations. Meet me in the lobby at 6:30. And James, wear the blue tie I got you for your birthday. It brings out your eyes." "Yes, Captain," he replied, using his nickname for me from the early days of our relationship. After handling several operational issues, a delivery of incorrect linens, a minor kitchen crisis, and a guest who insisted their room didn't have the right mountain view, I returned to my quarters to change for dinner. The owner's apartment was tucked away on the far wing of the resort, accessible through a private entrance and elevator. The spacious 3-bedroom residence reflected my personal taste rather than the resort's curated aesthetic. Comfortable leather furniture, bookshelves filled with military history and hospitality management texts, and large windows that framed the mountains I'd fallen in love with during childhood visits to my grandmother. I selected a simple black cocktail dress that Gloria had once described as adequate for someone with your athletic build, paired with the pearl necklace James had given me on our 5th anniversary. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the best revenge is just showing up looking damn good. She had built the original Pinecrest Inn after her husband, my grandfather, had died suddenly, leaving her with minimal savings and a rundown property. The local bank had refused her a business loan, suggesting she sell to a male investor instead. She'd proved them all wrong, just as I'd continued to do. At precisely 6:30, I met James in the lobby. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit and the blue tie that indeed brought out the striking color of his eyes. The same eyes that had caught my attention 12 years ago at a veterans fundraiser where he'd been representing his family's foundation, and I'd been fresh out of the service. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "Ready for battle?" "I survived insurgent attacks and IED sweeps," I replied with a smile. "I think I can handle one Christmas dinner with your mother." Maxwell's had already gathered in the private dining room when we arrived. Gloria was holding court at the head of the table, a position I'd specifically instructed the staff to reserve for Richard, while critiquing the floral arrangements to Madeline, who was nodding with the practiced patience of a daughter who had long ago learned that agreement was the path of least resistance. "Sarah, darling, there you are," Gloria called out with manufactured warmth when she spotted us. "I was just telling everyone how cleverly you've managed to advance at this charming resort, from the front desk to management in such a short time." The astonishing ability of Gloria Maxwell to rewrite history never ceased to amaze me. In her version, my career was always minimized, my achievements accidental or overblown. The fact that I'd been managing high-end properties for 8 years and had turned Pinecrest from a failing business into an award-winning destination was conveniently forgotten. "Thank you, Gloria," I replied pleasantly, though I've actually been in management for some time now. Richard pulled out my chair with unexpected courtesy. "The resort is impressive, Sarah. The architecture manages to be both grand and intimate, not an easy balance to achieve." "I'm glad you appreciate it," I said sincerely. Richard had always been the more reasonable of my in-laws, though his tendency to defer to Gloria on family matters had created its own problems over the years. The first course arrived, a delicate butternut squash soup with truffle oil, one of Chef Marcel's specialties, along with the initial wine pairing, a crisp Sancerre that complemented the dish perfectly. "I must say," Gloria commented after her first spoonful, "the culinary standards are surprisingly sophisticated for such a remote location." Chef Marcel trained in Paris before working at the French Laundry in Napa, I explained. "We were fortunate to recruit him last year." "You must have a substantial operating budget," Richard noted with professional interest. "I imagine the owners have invested heavily in the property." James caught my eye across the table, his expression questioning whether this was the moment for revelation. I gave a subtle headshake. The timing wasn't right. Not yet. "The ownership is committed to excellence," I answered diplomatically. "Every aspect of the guest experience is carefully considered." Gloria turned to James. "Darling, have you confirmed our Christmas Eve arrangements?" "I've spoken with the concierge about having a private family dinner in our suite, but apparently there's some conflict with the resort's schedule." "I was going to mention that," I interjected. "The resort hosts an annual Christmas Eve gala for guests and local dignitaries. It's quite an event. Live music, a 5-course meal, dancing. The entire staff participates." "Well, I'm sure they can spare a few servers and a chef for a private family dinner," Gloria dismissed with a wave of her hand. "We're paying premium rates, after all." "Unfortunately, that won't be possible," I stated firmly. "The gala is a signature event that's been planned for months. Every staff member has an essential role." Gloria's expression tightened. "I specifically chose this week to have uninterrupted family time, Sarah. Surely you can make an exception and join us for Christmas Eve instead of working at some resort party." The irony of her suddenly wanting my presence after explicitly uninviting me 3 weeks ago wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Madeline looked down at her soup, suppressing what appeared to be a smile. "The gala is non-negotiable," I replied evenly. "However, the Maxwell family is certainly welcome to attend as my guests. It's quite an exceptional evening." "We don't need charity invitations," Gloria sniffed. "If you prioritize work over family during Christmas, that's your choice," James set down his wine glass with slightly more force than necessary. "Mother, Sarah isn't choosing work over family. You specifically told her 3 weeks ago that she wasn't welcome at our family Christmas because, and I quote, her work commitments make it clear where her priorities lie. You can't have it both ways." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The twins, who had been absorbed in their phones, finally looked up, sensing the tension. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we could attend the gala and then have our family celebration on Christmas Day," he suggested reasonably. "I'd actually enjoy seeing this signature event Sarah's created." "I haven't created anything yet," Gloria muttered under her breath, just loud enough to be heard. I caught the server's eye and nodded for the second course to be brought out. As the delicate plates of seared scallops with citrus reduction were placed before each guest, I decided to redirect the conversation. "Madeline, James mentioned you've taken on a new role with the Maxwell Foundation," I said. "How's that going?" My sister-in-law brightened. "It's been rewarding. We've expanded our veterans support program significantly this year." "Sarah was a veteran, wasn't she?" Gloria commented with feigned casualness. "Some sort of office position, I believe." "Captain Sarah Reynolds served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army Corps of Engineers." Richard corrected his wife before I could respond. "She received a Bronze Star for leading her unit to safety after their convoy hit an IED. He glanced at me with what seemed like genuine respect. I read the citation when it was announced in the newspaper. "Impressive work, Sarah." The table fell momentarily silent. In 10 years of marriage to James, this was perhaps the first time my father-in-law had acknowledged my military service with more than polite disinterest. Even more surprising was that he had apparently sought out information about my commendation. "It was just doing my job," I replied, the standard response ingrained in most veterans when civilians comment on their service. "My unit deserved the recognition more than I did." James reached over to squeeze my hand, knowing how rarely I discussed those days, particularly the incident that had earned the commendation. A chaotic afternoon of dust, blood, and split-second decisions that still occasionally invaded my dreams. "Well," Gloria said briskly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, "military service is admirable, of course, though I've always thought there must be more appropriate ways for women to serve their country." Madeline didn't bother hiding her eye roll this time. "Mother, please join us in the 21st century. Sarah literally built infrastructure that helped both our troops and local civilians. What could be more appropriate?" The twins, Alexis and Zoe, both 16 and usually absorbed in their social media bubbles, suddenly seemed interested in the adult conversation. "Aunt Sarah, did you shoot people and stuff?" Alexis asked with the blunt curiosity of adolescence. "Alexis," David admonished his daughter, "that's not an appropriate question. Actually, I primarily built things," I explained, deciding to engage rather than deflect. "My unit constructed bridges, roads, medical facilities, and water treatment systems. We carried weapons for protection, but my job was creation, not destruction." "That's actually pretty cool," Zoe admitted, looking at me with new interest. "Our history teacher was talking about how infrastructure is super important after conflicts." "Your teacher is right," I confirmed. After my second tour, I worked on several reconstruction projects, which is how I got interested in property development and restoration. Gloria, clearly displeased with losing control of the conversation, tapped her wine glass with her fork. While Sarah's adventures are certainly interesting. Perhaps we should discuss our plans for the week. I've arranged for private ski lessons tomorrow morning, followed by lunch at the Alpine restaurant. The Alpine is fully booked tomorrow, I inserted smoothly. However, I've reserved the chef's table experience for the family at 1 p.m. It's an interactive dining experience where Chef Marcel prepares the meal tableside and explains each dish. It's not normally available during peak season, but I made an exception. Gloria's mouth tightened at another reminder that her usual approach of steamrolling over plans and people wasn't working as effectively in an environment where I held significant influence. How thoughtful, she managed. The dinner continued through 5 more exquisite courses, each paired with wines selected to complement the flavors perfectly. Despite Gloria's attempts to steer conversation toward Maxwell family gossip and social obligations, subjects that inherently excluded me, Richard repeatedly brought the discussion back to the resort, asking detailed questions about the architecture, the business model, and the local economic impact. The property must generate substantial revenue, he observed, while savoring the venison with blackberry reduction. Fully booked at these rates, especially during holiday seasons. The occupancy rate has increased 47% since the renovation 3 years ago, I confirmed. And we've been able to raise rates by 35% while maintaining booking levels. Fascinating, Richard murmured, his architect's mind clearly calculating the numbers. The initial investment must have been considerable. Speaking of investments, Gloria interrupted. James, have you discussed with Sarah your new position on the board of Maxwell Holdings? There will be considerable social obligations involved. James took a slow sip of his Bordeaux before responding. I've mentioned it, Mother. But as I told the board, I'll only be taking on responsibilities that accommodate both our schedules. Sarah's career is as important as mine. Gloria's laugh held that particular tinkling quality that always signaled condescension. Darling, managing a resort, while charming, hardly compares to overseeing a corporation with international holdings. I'm sure Sarah understands that your position will naturally take precedence. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced when faced with dismissive senior officers who couldn't see past my gender to recognize my capabilities. Before I could form a measured response, James spoke. Actually, Mother, Sarah's business generates annual revenue comparable to our Eastern Regional Division, he stated flatly. Her operational expertise and strategic planning skills are why the resort has become so successful. The board would be fortunate to have someone with her acumen. Gloria blinked, clearly not expecting her son to counter her so directly. Well, naturally she's very capable. I simply meant that the social aspects of board membership require certain connections and background that not everyone possesses. You mean like knowing which fork to use first at a 7-course dinner? I asked pleasantly, gesturing to her place setting where she had indeed been correctly navigating the formal table setting without hesitation. Or perhaps hosting galas attended by governors and senators? The reference to the resort's upcoming Christmas Eve Gala, which last year had indeed included the state governor and 2 senators among its guests, was not lost on Richard, whose eyebrows rose slightly. I mean the established social relationships that have supported Maxwell Holdings for generations, Gloria clarified coldly. The nuanced understanding of our circle that comes from being raised within it. Like the Andrews family? I inquired, innocently, naming one of the Maxwell's oldest business associates. Thomas Andrews specifically requested the Pinecrest for his daughter's wedding last summer. Lovely family. The slight widening of Gloria's eyes confirmed my hit. The Andrews were indeed among the old money connections she most prized, and the revelation that I had a relationship with them independent of the Maxwell connection clearly unsettled her. You handled their daughter's wedding? Madeline asked, with interest. Catherine mentioned it was spectacular, but didn't say where it was held. She said the venue was the most beautiful mountain setting she'd ever seen. We worked closely with Catherine on every detail, I confirmed. She wanted rustic elegance with sophisticated touches. The ceremony was held on the east lawn at sunset, with the reception in the grand hall. We transformed it with hanging installations of mountain wildflowers and crystal elements. That sounds absolutely breathtaking, Madeline said sincerely. Gloria studied me with new calculation in her eyes. I wasn't aware the Andrews family knew you socially. They don't, I replied simply. They know me professionally, which in some contexts is far more valuable. The dessert course arrived, a deconstructed black forest composition that was as visually stunning as it was delicious, providing a welcome break in the increasingly tense conversation. As we enjoyed the delicate balance of chocolate, cherry, and cream, I noticed Richard continuing to study the dining room architecture, his expression thoughtful. The restoration work is remarkable, he finally said. The original bones of the building have been respected while introducing modern elements. Who was the architect? I hesitated only briefly. I handled most of the design work myself in collaboration with Hernandez and Associates for the technical specifications. My engineering background from the Army Corps proved useful. Richard set down his dessert spoon, genuine surprise crossing his features. You designed this? The whole resort renovation? The original structure was my grandmother's inn, I explained, deciding to reveal at least this much of my connection to the property. I grew up visiting every summer, so I knew its potential and its challenges intimately. When the renovation opportunity came, I already had a vision for what it could become. Your grandmother owned an inn in this location? Gloria interrupted, suddenly more interested. Was it sold to developers? Something like that, I replied vaguely, not ready to reveal the full truth. James caught my eye, silently asking if I wanted him to explain further. I gave a subtle headshake. The revelation of my ownership would come, but on my terms and at the moment of my choosing, not as an aside during dessert conversation. The property has excellent bones, Richard continued, professional interest overriding social niceties. The sightlines from the public spaces are perfectly framed, and the balance between grand scale and intimate corners is masterfully executed. You have a genuine talent for spatial design, Sarah. Coming from a man who had designed award-winning buildings across 3 continents, the compliment carried significant weight. I felt an unexpected flush of pride that my father-in-law, who had barely acknowledged my professional existence for a decade, was offering genuine appreciation of my work. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot coming from you. Gloria, clearly displeased by her husband's admiration of my accomplishments, signaled for the server to refill her wine glass. While this has been enlightening, I'm rather tired from the journey. Perhaps we should retire for the evening. James, will you be coming up to the suite? The question held a clear implication, choosing between staying with his wife or joining his family. Before James could respond, I intervened smoothly. Actually, I need to handle a few operational matters before turning in. The holiday week requires some extra attention. I smiled at my husband. You should spend time with your family. I'll join you later. James gave me a grateful look, recognizing my strategic retreat. While he had always supported me against his mother's manipulations, I knew he also valued family peace, and sometimes the wisest tactical decision was a temporary withdrawal. I'll walk you out, he said, standing as I rose from the table. In the private hallway outside the dining room, he pulled me into a quick embrace. You're handling her remarkably well, he murmured against my hair. Dad's obviously impressed, which is driving her crazy. I noticed, I replied with a small smile. Did you see her face when he complimented my design work? Like she'd bitten into a lemon, James confirmed. When are you going to tell them about your ownership? I considered the question, weighing options like I'd been trained to assess tactical scenarios. Not yet. Let things develop naturally for another day. The Christmas Eve gala will be the perfect moment when they can see exactly what I've built. Here! You're enjoying this a little too much, he accused with a grin. After 10 years of condescension? I'm enjoying it exactly the right amount, I corrected, stretching up to kiss him briefly. Go spend time with your family. I actually do have some work to handle. Yes, Captain, he replied with a mock salute before turning serious. I'm proud of you, Sarah, not just for the resort's success, but for how you're handling all of this. My mother would have reduced most people to tears by now. The Taliban were scarier, I deadpanned, earning a laugh before we parted ways. After dinner, I retreated to my office rather than immediately returning to our apartment. The evening's interactions had left me with a familiar tension between my shoulder blades, the same tension I'd felt during military briefings when presenting plans to skeptical superiors. Gloria had that effect on me, making me feel perpetually under evaluation and found wanting, despite all evidence to the contrary. The resort's night operations were running smoothly, the lobby transformed by the evening lighting that highlighted the massive stone fireplace and the 20-foot Christmas tree. Through the windows, snow fell in gentle flakes, adding another pristine layer to the already perfect winter scene. Groups of guests gathered in conversation clusters around the fire, while others enjoyed live piano music in the adjacent lounge. This atmosphere of warmth and refined comfort was exactly what I had envisioned when redesigning the space. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Incident report. G. Maxwell complained to evening concierge about room temperature, 2 degrees. Too warm. Quality of hangers, not velvet covered. And insufficient suitcase stands, wanted 3, suite has standard 2. Requested thermometer to prove room temp. I smiled despite myself. Emily had instituted a special notification system for VIP guests with particular tendencies, what we privately called the high-maintenance alert. Gloria had earned her place in this system within hours of arrival. Standard protocol, I texted. Back. Thermometer, velvet hangers, extra luggage stand. But lag time 20 minutes to make it seem like effort. Already handled, Emily replied. Also, Mr. R. Maxwell stopped by concierge to inquire about resort history and ownership structure, seemed quite interested. Concierge followed protocol and referred him to PR materials only. That was interesting. Richard's curiosity about the resort's architecture had apparently extended to its business aspects. I made a mental note to be prepared for more detailed questions from him tomorrow. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called, expecting Emily or another staff member. Instead, Madeline entered, looking slightly uncertain. James's younger sister and I had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship, largely defined by our rare interactions at Maxwell family gatherings. Unlike her mother, Madeline had never been overtly critical of me, but neither had she made efforts to develop a closer connection. Sorry to disturb you, she said, glancing around my office with evident curiosity. James mentioned you'd be working for a while. Not a disturbance at all, I assured her, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. Can I help with something? Madeline sat, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture reminiscent of her brother. This is awkward, but I wanted to apologize for Mom's behavior. The thing about uninviting you from Christmas was completely out of line. The apology surprised me. In 10 years of marriage to James, this was the first time any Maxwell had acknowledged Gloria's inappropriate behavior toward me. Thank you, I said simply. I appreciate that. The irony of her suddenly wanting you at the family dinner after, specifically excluding you, isn't lost on any of us, Madeline continued. David thinks it's hilarious, though he'd never say so to her face. I allowed myself a small smile. Your mother has a certain consistency in her approach to me. You mean consistently treating you like an inconvenient accessory rather than a family member? Madeline's directness surprised me again. Yeah, We've noticed. Dad has too, though he rarely stands up to her. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn toward intimacy that made me slightly uncomfortable. Years of maintaining professional distance from the Maxwell family dynamics had become a habit. "It's complicated," I offered diplomatically. "It's ridiculous," Madeline corrected. "You've been married to my brother for a decade. You make him happier than I've ever seen him. And yet Mom still acts like you're some temporary situation that will eventually resolve itself when James comes to his senses." It's embarrassing. I studied my sister-in-law with new interest. Her candor suggested either a recent change in perspective or a long-held opinion she'd never before expressed. "What brought this on?" I asked carefully. Madeline sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Honestly, seeing you in your professional element. You've always been so reserved at family gatherings that I never really got a sense of who you are. But watching you manage this place, seeing how the staff respects you, how confidently you handle everything, including my mother, it's impressive. You've built something remarkable here." "You don't know the half of it," I murmured before I could stop myself. She tilted her head curiously. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, weighing the implications of bringing Madeline into my confidence before the planned revelation. But something in her genuine interest made me reconsider my caution. Perhaps having an ally in the Maxwell family besides James would be advantageous. "Can you keep a secret for another day or so?" I asked. "Absolutely." I leaned forward slightly. "I don't just manage Pinecrest Resort. I own it, completely." The property belonged to my grandmother originally. It was a small inn that was struggling when I inherited it after my second tour in Afghanistan. I leveraged my military benefits and a small business loan to begin renovations, then reinvested every profit until it became what you see today. Madeline's eyes widened. "You own this entire resort? Does Mom know?" "Only James knows among the Maxwells. I've kept my ownership private for professional reasons. It's easier to manage staff when they see you as a fellow employee rather than the owner. But with your mother, I'll admit there's been an element of waiting for the right moment." A slow smile spread across Madeline's face. "And that moment would be?" "The Christmas Eve gala seems appropriate. It's the resort's signature event, and it showcases everything I've built here." Madeline's laugh held genuine delight. "Mom's going to absolutely lose it. 10 years of condescending to you about your little hotel job, and you own one of the most exclusive mountain resorts in the region." "It's perfect." She paused, considering. "That's why you couldn't accommodate her private Christmas Eve dinner demands. Not just because of the gala, but because you're literally running the event." "Exactly. And while I could theoretically make special arrangements as the owner, I won't undermine my staff's months of planning for the gala just to appease Gloria's need for control." "This is the best Christmas gift ever," Madeline declared. "Not just finding out you're a secret hotel magnate, but getting to watch Mom's face when she realizes it." She glanced at my office, taking in the monitors showing various resort operations. "You run this place like a military operation, don't you?" I smiled at her perception. "Old habits. The Army Corps taught me that good infrastructure requires both careful planning and constant maintenance. A resort isn't so different from a forward operating base in some ways. Everyone needs to know their role. Resources must be allocated efficiently, and you always need contingency plans." "The twins would love to hear about that comparison," Madeline noted. "They've been asking about you since dinner. Your military background suddenly makes their cool aunt considerably cooler." The concept of being anyone's cool aunt was so foreign to my understanding of my place in the Maxwell family that I wasn't sure how to respond. For years, I'd assumed the twins barely registered my existence beyond Uncle James's wife. "They're welcome to ask me anything," I offered. "Though some aspects of military service aren't appropriate for dinner conversation, which is why I tend to deflect Gloria's pointed questions." Mom's questions aren't genuine interest anyway, Madeline said with a dismissive wave. They're designed to emphasize your difference from the family norm. She did the same thing with David when we first got married, constantly bringing up his humble beginnings in Iowa farm country. And now? Now she conveniently forgets he wasn't born with a silver spoon and introduces him as David Maxwell, the investment strategist, rather than David Peterson, who grew up milking cows. Madeline's expression turned thoughtful. Mom values the appearance of things above all else. The right schools, the right clubs, the right addresses. It's exhausting, honestly. Yet you've managed to navigate it successfully, I observed, by picking my battles and having a husband who doesn't care about her approval. Madeline stood, smoothing her slacks. I should let you get back to work, but I'm glad we had this conversation, Sarah. I feel like I'm finally getting to know my sister-in-law after a decade. I appreciate your discretion about the ownership situation, I said. I'd rather reveal it on my terms. Your secret is safe with me, though I'll warn you. Dad was asking a lot of questions about the resort's business model after you left dinner. He has a good nose for these things. He might figure it out before your big reveal. After Madeline left, I found myself contemplating this new dimension to our relationship. For years, I'd viewed the entire Maxwell family through the lens of Gloria's disapproval, assuming her attitude reflected the family consensus. The possibility that I might have potential allies beyond James was unexpected, but welcome. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from James. Family nightcap in the suite. Mom asking pointed questions about resort management structure. Dad unusually interested. Your presence requested but not required. I smiled at his careful wording. On my way. Just finishing up, I replied. When I arrived at the Aspen Suite 10 minutes later, the Maxwell family had arranged themselves in the great room. Gloria and Richard occupied the sofa nearest the fireplace, while James and David were engaged in conversation by the windows. The twins, surprisingly, were not on their phones, but instead flipping through a coffee table book about the history of the region. Sarah, there you are, Gloria greeted me with manufactured warmth. We were just discussing this lovely resort. Richard is quite taken with the architecture. The integration of modern amenities while preserving the rustic character is exemplary, Richard elaborated, his expression genuinely appreciative. I'd be interested in meeting the primary architect sometime during our stay. I'll see what I can arrange, I replied neutrally, accepting the glass of whiskey James handed me. It was my favorite small batch bourbon, one we stocked exclusively for the owner's private collection. Good day tomorrow, James murmured as I settled beside him. Skiing in the morning, then the chef's table experience I mentioned at dinner. Gloria, overhearing, interjected smoothly. I've been meaning to ask Sarah, will you be joining us for skiing? I know how busy you must be with your management duties. The implication was clear. Surely I wouldn't have time for family activities, given my work commitments. The very commitments she had previously used as grounds to exclude me from Christmas celebrations. Actually, I've arranged my schedule to join you, I replied pleasantly. The Black Diamond runs on the north face are spectacular after fresh snowfall like we've had today. Black Diamond? Gloria repeated skeptically. Those are expert level trails, aren't they? They are, I confirmed. I've been skiing these mountains since I was 8 years old. My grandmother made sure I could handle the expert runs before I was a teenager. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman, Richard commented. She was, I agreed, a familiar warmth filling me at his acknowledgement. A single woman running a mountain inn in an era when banks wouldn't even grant her a business loan. Without a male cosigner, she built something special here through sheer determination. Here at this resort? Gloria asked sharply, her attention suddenly focused. I realized my slip immediately. In this area, I clarified, not yet ready to reveal the full connection. The original property was smaller, of course, Gloria seemed ready to pursue the topic further when one of the twins, Alexis, I thought, though I still occasionally confuse them, approached with the coffee table book open to a specific page. "Aunt Sarah, is this the same place?" It says, "Pinecrest Inn, 1975" under the photo. I glanced at the image, a familiar A-frame structure with my grandmother standing proudly on the front porch, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. The original inn before expansion, renovation, or modernization, the humble beginning of what had become Pinecrest Mountain Resort. "Yes, that's the original Pinecrest," I confirmed, unable to keep the affection from my voice. "And that's my grandmother, Elizabeth Reynolds." "Wait," Gloria interrupted, leaning forward to examine the photograph. "Your grandmother owned the original inn on this property? The one that became this resort?" "She did," I acknowledged, feeling James tense slightly beside me. This wasn't how we'd planned to begin the revelation, but adaptability had been essential. In my military career, and it served me equally well in civilian life. "What happened to it?" Richard asked, professional curiosity evident. "Was it sold to developers for the current resort?" I took a deliberate sip of my bourbon, allowing the smooth warmth to center me before responding. "Not exactly. But that's a conversation better suited for tomorrow. It's getting late and we have an early start for skiing." The deflection was transparent, and I could see calculation in Gloria's eyes as she processed this new information. The connection between my grandmother's modest inn and the luxury resort where they were staying had sparked her interest in a way few things about me ever had. "Of course, dear," she said with unusual graciousness. "We wouldn't want to keep you from your rest, though I do look forward to hearing more about this family connection to Pinecrest." As James and I left the suite a short while later, he whispered, "So much for your perfect timing at the gala." "Adaptability is the hallmark of good leadership," I replied with a small smile. "Besides, I've only confirmed my grandmother owned the original inn. The revelation that her granddaughter now owns the entire expanded resort can still wait for the appropriate moment." "You're enjoying this too much," he accused affectionately. "After 10 years of your mother's subtle disapproval?" "I'm enjoying it exactly the right amount," I corrected. "Sometimes the best validation isn't telling someone they're wrong. It's showing them." Morning arrived with another 6 inches of pristine powder snow, ideal conditions for the Maxwell family's planned ski excursion. I awoke before dawn, as was my habit from military days, and spent an hour reviewing overnight reports and handling emails before most guests had even stirred. The resort operated like a small, self-contained city, with hundreds of moving parts that required constant attention, especially during peak season. By 7, I had completed a walkthrough of the main facilities, checked in with the breakfast, service team, and confirmed arrangements for the day's activities. The early hours were my favorite, quiet, purposeful, and productive before the demands of guests and family created competing priorities. I returned to our apartment to change. For skiing, finding James still asleep, his expression relaxed in a way it rarely was around his family. The contrast between his professional confidence in the boardroom and his careful navigation of family dynamics had always intrigued me. James Maxwell, the decisive corporate strategist who could close multi-million-dollar deals without breaking, a sweat transformed into a more cautious version of himself in his mother's presence. "You're thinking too loudly," he murmured without opening his eyes. "Military morning again?" "Resort doesn't run itself," I replied, sitting beside him on the bed. "Though some days I wish it would." He propped himself on one elbow, studying me, with still sleepy eyes. "Having second thoughts about the big reveal? We could just tell them privately." I considered the question seriously. The plan to announce my ownership during the Christmas Eve gala had emerged partly from strategic timing, and partly, I had to admit, from a desire for a certain dramatic justice after years of Gloria's dismissive attitude toward my career. But James's concern was valid. Was I making a spectacle of something that could be handled more discreetly? No second thoughts, I decided, but I'll adjust based on how today unfolds. Your father's interest seems genuine, and Madeline's conversation last night was unexpected. Madeline talked to you? James sat up fully now, surprise evident. About what? Essentially apologizing for your mother's behavior and expressing interest in my work here. It was actually quite nice. I stood and moved toward my closet, selecting thermal layers for skiing. She knows about my ownership now. It came up organically in our conversation. And you told her before the planned reveal? His tone held no accusation, just curiosity. Tactical adjustment, I explained with a small smile. Having an ally besides you in the Maxwell ranks seemed prudent. James laughed. The military strategist emerges again. Should I be concerned you're assembling forces against my mother? Not forces, just ensuring operational support, I corrected, tossing his ski layers onto the bed. Now gear up, Commander. We hit the slopes at 900 hours. 2 hours later, we assembled outside the resort's exclusive ski entrance, where equipment had been prepared for each family member according to their previously submitted preferences. Gloria arrived last, naturally, dressed in a designer ski suit that had clearly never seen actual use, its pristine white fabric and fur-trimmed hood more suited to fashion photography than athletic activity. I thought we might have a guide, she commented, surveying the arranged equipment with slight disdain. These mountains can be treacherous for those unfamiliar with them. I'll be your guide, I offered, adjusting my helmet. As I mentioned, I've been skiing these slopes since childhood. Gloria's expression suggested this was inadequate, but Richard intervened before she could object. Excellent. Local knowledge is invaluable on unfamiliar terrain. The twins appeared genuinely excited, already strapping on their snowboards with practiced movements that indicated they at least had some experience, despite their general teen apathy toward most family activities. Madeline and David were similarly efficient with their gear, suggesting they were more accomplished skiers than Gloria's pristine outfit would indicate. We'll start with the main intermediate run to warm up, I suggested. Then those who are comfortable can try the more advanced slopes while others continue enjoying the intermediates. I think I'll observe from the lodge, Gloria decided, eyeing the mountain with newfound wariness. The altitude doesn't quite agree with me this morning. The observation deck has excellent views of all the main runs, I agreed readily, having anticipated this outcome. Gloria Maxwell had never struck me as someone who would willingly engage in an activity where she wasn't assured of looking competent and controlled. I've arranged for a special service there. Hot chocolate with peppermint schnapps and those almond cookies you mentioned enjoying at the Hendersons' holiday party last year. The slight widening of Gloria's eyes confirmed my hit. She hadn't expected me to remember such a detail from a casual comment made at a social event months ago. But attention to detail was my stock in trade, both in the military and in hospitality management. Knowing guests' preferences, even when they themselves had forgotten expressing them, was what elevated excellent service to exceptional. How thoughtful, she managed, the words seemingly difficult to extract. The skiing expedition proceeded better than I'd anticipated. Richard proved to be surprisingly agile on the slopes, keeping pace with James and me as we tackled progressively more challenging runs. The twins quickly abandoned the intermediate trails for the terrain park, where their snowboarding skills could be showcased more dramatically. Madeline and David moved between intermediate and advanced slopes at a comfortable pace, clearly enjoying the perfect snow conditions. You weren't exaggerating about knowing these mountains, Richard commented as we paused at the top of a particularly challenging run. The valley spread below us in a panorama of white-covered peaks and evergreens. Your grandmother taught you well. She believed in learning by doing, I confirmed. Her philosophy was that you couldn't properly manage something unless you understood it from every angle. She used to help the maintenance staff repair chairlifts in the off-season so she'd know exactly what was involved when budgeting for equipment. Richard nodded appreciatively. A wise approach. Too many in business maintain artificial distance from operations, then make decisions based on spreadsheets rather than practical knowledge. The comment held a subtle critique of the Maxwell corporate culture, where executives rarely ventured beyond boardrooms and corner offices. It was the most direct acknowledgement I'd ever received from Richard that my practical, hands-on approach might have legitimate value. Sarah practically rebuilt half the resort's infrastructure herself during the renovation, James added, adjusting his goggles. The contractors were constantly finding her checking their work or suggesting alternative approaches based on her engineering experience. You have engineering training as well? Richard asked, genuine interest evident despite the wind whipping. Around us. Army Corps of Engineers, I reminded him. My specialty was infrastructure development and maintenance in challenging environments. A luxury mountain resort actually has surprising similarities to a forward operating base in Afghanistan. Remote location, extreme weather conditions, complex supply logistics, and critical systems that can't afford to fail. Richard laughed, unexpectedly. I've never heard resort management described quite that way, though I can see the parallels. He studied the mountain thoughtfully. Your grandmother would be proud of what you've accomplished here. The simple statement, delivered, without Gloria's usual undertone of condescension, struck a deeper chord than I'd anticipated. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot. We completed several more challenging runs before reuniting with the others for lunch. As promised, I'd arranged the chef's table experience in a private dining area with spectacular views of the mountains. Chef Marcel greeted the family personally, explaining the interactive format where he would prepare each course tableside while discussing techniques and ingredients. Gloria, who had spent the morning on the observation deck, recovering from the altitude, appeared surprisingly animated as we arrived. Sarah, darling, the most extraordinary thing happened during my morning respite. Beatrice Chapman was here with her family. We had the most lovely conversation. The name meant nothing to me, but James's slight grimace told me this was someone from the Maxwell social circle who held significance to Gloria. How fortunate, I replied neutrally, accepting the glass of champagne a server offered as we settled around the specially designed chef's table. Indeed, Beatrice serves on the symphony board with me, and her husband Charles manages significant investments for several families in our circle. Gloria's emphasis on our circle carried the usual implication that this was a world to which I had no natural access. They were absolutely effusive about Pinecrest. Apparently, they attempted to secure reservations months ago, but were told the resort was fully committed. Beatrice was quite impressed when I mentioned our family connection. I kept my expression pleasant but non-committal. I'm glad they're enjoying their stay. Connection? Chef Marcel inquired as he began preparing the first course, a delicate amuse-bouche featuring locally sourced trout. You are related to someone at Pinecrest, madame? Before I could intervene, Gloria continued. Sarah's grandmother, apparently, owned the original property that became this resort. A small inn, I understand, before the developers transformed it. She turned to me with calculated interest. You never did explain what happened to your grandmother's property, dear. Was it sold after her passing? The direct question in front of staff placed me in precisely the awkward position Gloria had likely intended. Professional discretion had been my policy regarding ownership, but her pointed inquiry made evasion difficult without seeming unnecessarily secretive. James caught my eye with a subtle, questioning look, his expression asking whether I wanted him to intervene or whether I was ready to address the situation. I gave an almost imperceptible shake of my head. If Gloria wanted answers, she would get them, but on my terms. My grandmother left me the property in her will, I explained simply. After my military service, I decided to focus on developing it to its full potential. Developing? Gloria latched onto the word immediately. You mean you consulted on the sale to developers? No, I corrected calmly. I mean I developed the property myself, expanding the original structure and facilities. To create what you see today. The table fell momentarily silent as the implications of my statement registered. Chef Marcel, sensing the shift in atmosphere, discreetly focused on his preparation, though I noted the slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He, like all long-term staff, was well aware of my ownership position. "You're suggesting you had some role in the resort's creation?" Gloria clarified, her tone making it clear she found this implausible. "Beyond your management position?" "What Sarah means," James intervened smoothly, "is that her involvement with Pinecrest extends beyond her current role. The full explanation is rather complex and probably better suited for a private family discussion rather than lunch." "I'd actually be quite interested in hearing more about the property's development," Richard countered, his architectural interest evidently piqued. The transition from small inn to luxury resort must have been a fascinating process from an engineering and design perspective. I met Gloria's calculating gaze directly. As James suggested, the complete history is somewhat involved. But the simplified version is that I inherited my grandmother's inn, leveraged my military benefits and expertise to begin renovation and expansion, and continued reinvesting until Pinecrest evolved into its current form. "You're being modest, Mrs. Reynolds," Chef Marcel interjected as he placed the first exquisite bites before each guest. "The transformation under your leadership has been nothing short of remarkable. The original structure had only 12 guest rooms, did it not? And now we accommodate over 200 guests in luxury accommodations, plus all the amenities." Gloria's complexion had taken on a peculiar pallor. "Are you saying you own this resort?" I took a deliberate sip of champagne before responding. "Yes, Gloria. I own Pinecrest Mountain Resort. Completely. I have since my grandmother passed away 8 years ago, though the property has undergone significant evolution since then." The silence that followed was broken only by the subtle sounds of Chef Marcel's preparations. Madeline caught my eye from across the table, her expression a mixture of suppressed delight and anticipation as Gloria processed information that fundamentally contradicted her decade-long narrative about my career and capabilities. "But this is one of the most exclusive mountain destinations in the country," Gloria finally managed, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "The Andersons had to book their stay a year in advance. Senator Williams was on the waiting list for the holiday week. We maintain high standards and limited availability to ensure the guest experience remains exceptional," I confirmed. "Quality over quantity has always been my priority." Richard was studying me with new interest, professional assessment evident in his gaze. "The initial capital investment must have been substantial. Did you have other investors?" "No," I replied simply. "I began with my grandmother's property as collateral for the initial renovation loan, then leveraged each successful phase to fund the next expansion. The resort has been debt-free for the past 3 years and continues to exceed revenue projections each quarter." The information landed like a physical force at the table. For a decade, Gloria had positioned me as the career-obsessed wife who prioritized a hotel job over proper society wife obligations, a narrative that minimized both my professional accomplishments and my financial contribution to my marriage with James. The revelation that I single-handedly owned an internationally recognized luxury property worth tens of millions effectively shattered that carefully constructed narrative in an instant. "Why didn't you tell us?" Gloria finally asked, her tone accusatory despite her obvious effort to maintain composure. "I maintain professional boundaries between ownership and management," I explained. "Very few people know I own Pinecrest. It's simply not relevant to day-to-day operations, and I prefer to be judged on my management capabilities rather than my position as owner." "But we're family," Gloria insisted, emphasizing the very connection she had so recently denied when excluding me from Christmas celebrations. James set down his champagne glass with subtle precision. "Are we, Mother?" 3 weeks ago, you specifically uninvited Sarah from our family Christmas, stating that the holidays are for family, and Sarah's work commitments made it clear where her priorities lie. Gloria's face flushed. That was a misunderstanding. Was it? I asked quietly. Or was it simply the most recent example of a pattern that's existed since James and I married? A pattern where my career is dismissed as unimportant, my military service is conveniently forgotten except when it can be criticized as unfeminine, and my contributions are consistently minimized? The charged silence that followed my question made Chef Marcel clear his throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should give the family some privacy for this discussion. I can return in 15 minutes to continue our culinary experience. That won't be necessary, Marcel, I assured him, my professional demeanor reasserting itself. Family matters can be addressed later. We're here to enjoy your exceptional cuisine. The chef nodded gratefully and continued his preparation of the second course, a delicate scallop crudo with citrus and local herbs, while conversation around the table remained stilted. Gloria stared at her champagne flute, her expression unreadable, while Richard studied me with new consideration in his gaze. The twins, for once, weren't on their phones, but instead watching the adult dynamics unfold with unusual interest. So, you're basically loaded? Alexis finally asked, breaking the tension with teenage directness. Alexis, Madeline admonished, though I noticed she seemed more amused than scandalized by her daughter's question. It's a fair question, I acknowledged with a small smile. Pinecrest is a successful business, yes, but I measure its value more in what we've built here, the experiences we create, the local employment we provide, the environmental sustainability we've achieved, rather than simply the financial returns. But you could buy, whatever you want? Zoe persisted, apparently fascinated by this revelation about her previously unremarkable aunt. Material acquisition has never been my primary motivation, I explained, accepting the beautiful scallop dish Chef Marcel presented. My military service taught me to value different things: stability, purpose, the satisfaction of building something meaningful. Gloria had recovered enough composure to rejoin the conversation, though her voice held a brittle quality I hadn't heard before. Well, this certainly explains why you've been so resistant to taking a more appropriate role as James's wife. With your own project to manage, naturally family obligations would seem secondary. Mother, James warned quietly, I'm merely observing that Sarah's divided priorities now make more sense, Gloria continued, cutting her scallop with precise movements that betrayed her tension. Though I must say, dear, maintaining such secrecy about your business seems unnecessarily dramatic, almost as if you wanted us to underestimate you. The accusation held just enough truth to sting, while my decision to keep ownership private had legitimate professional foundations. I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in knowing the eventual revelation would force a reckoning with Gloria's dismissive attitude. Professional discretion isn't secrecy, I countered evenly. And I didn't need to engineer underestimation, Gloria. You accomplished that entirely on your own from the moment James introduced me as an army captain, rather than a debutante from your social circle. Richard intervened before Gloria could respond. The military background clearly served you well in business. This property's transformation represents remarkable vision and execution. I'd be interested in touring the facilities from an architectural perspective if you're amenable. His professional interest offered a welcome deflection from the personal tension. I'd be happy to arrange that, Richard. The integration of the original structure with the expansions presented some unique challenges I think you'd appreciate. Did you work with Hernandez on the entire project? He asked, referring to the architectural firm I'd mentioned previously. Their mountain resort portfolio is impressive. For the major structural elements, yes. But I personally designed many of the interior spaces and amenities based on my grandmother's original vision and my own experiences with what luxury travelers increasingly value: authenticity combined with exceptional comfort. As Richard engaged, Me in detailed questions about the construction process, I noticed Gloria watching our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. The conversation gradually shifted to safer territory as Chef Marcel presented each subsequent course, explaining the local sourcing and techniques with enthusiasm. By the dessert course, a sophisticated reinterpretation of s'mores featuring house-made marshmallows and artisanal chocolate, the family dynamic had settled into a strange new configuration. Richard continued his genuinely interested inquiries about the resort's development. The twins peppered me with questions about my military service, suddenly finding their aunt's background fascinating now that it connected to tangible success. Madeline and David exchanged occasional glances that suggested they were thoroughly enjoying Gloria's discomfort. Gloria herself maintained a carefully composed exterior, though her contributions to conversation had become minimal. I recognized the tactical retreat. She was reassessing and regrouping rather than truly conceding. After lunch concluded, the family dispersed for various afternoon activities. The twins headed for the resort's game room, while Madeline and David opted for the spa. Richard accepted my offer of an architectural tour, his professional interest clearly genuine. Gloria excused herself to rest before dinner, though the calculating look in her eyes suggested rest was the furthest thing from her mind. As James and I walked his father toward the main lobby to begin the tour, he whispered, "That wasn't exactly how we planned the revelation." "Adaptability under pressure is essential leadership skill," I murmured back. "Besides, your mother's reaction was worth accelerating the timeline." "She's regrouping, you know," he cautioned. "This isn't over." "I'm counting on it," I replied with a small smile. The architectural tour with Richard proved unexpectedly enjoyable. His genuine appreciation for the challenges we'd overcome in expanding the original structure while maintaining its character was professional and thoughtful. We discussed load-bearing considerations in mountain environments, snow-shedding roof designs, and the considerable engineering involved in creating the dramatic glass-walled spaces that showcased the mountain views. "The integration of sustainable systems is particularly impressive," Richard noted, as we examined the geothermal heating system that significantly reduced the resort's carbon footprint. "These weren't standard approaches 8 years ago when you began." My experience in Afghanistan included implementing sustainable infrastructure in remote locations, I explained. "When resources are limited and supply chains unreliable, you learn to design systems that can operate independently and efficiently. Those same principles translate well to mountain resort management, though admittedly with fewer security concerns." Richard chuckled. "I imagine there are other parallels between managing soldiers and managing resort staff." "More than you might expect," I acknowledged. "Clear communication, defined expectations, recognition of effort, and understanding that team cohesion determines success more than individual brilliance. The main difference is that I can't order the housekeeping staff to do push-ups when rooms aren't prepared to standard." This earned a genuine laugh, perhaps the first I'd ever heard from my father-in-law directed at something I'd said. For a decade, our interactions had been cordial but distant, largely defined by Gloria's orchestration of family dynamics. This direct professional engagement revealed a different side to Richard, one that actually seemed to value expertise and accomplishment, regardless of its source. "You've created something remarkable here, Sarah," he said as we completed our tour in the grand lobby. "From both business and architectural perspectives, I understand now why you've been so committed to your work." The simple acknowledgement meant more than I wanted to admit. "Thank you, Richard. That's significant coming from you." He hesitated, then added, "I should apologize for not showing more interest in your professional life previously. Gloria has always handled the family's social connections, and I defaulted to her judgment perhaps more than was warranted." The admission stunned me momentarily. In 10 years of marriage to James, this was the first time either of his parents had acknowledged any misjudgment regarding me. I appreciate that, I said simply, unsure how to respond more comprehensively without venturing into territory that might feel uncomfortably vulnerable. Richard nodded, seemingly equally uncertain about navigating this new interpersonal territory. I should find Gloria before dinner. She's likely processing today's revelations. That's a diplomatic way to put it, I observed with a small smile. 45 years of marriage teaches one diplomacy, if nothing else, he replied with unexpected wryness. For what it's worth, I think James made an excellent choice, in you and in maintaining his own path rather than simply following family expectations. As Richard departed, I found myself standing in the center of the lobby, my lobby, experiencing a strange mixture of vindication and disorientation. The careful compartmentalization I'd maintained between Sarah the daughter-in-law and Sarah the resort owner had collapsed, creating a new reality I hadn't fully prepared for, despite planning the revelation. Emily approached from the reception desk, her expression curious. Everything okay? You have that 1,000-yard stare the staff has learned to recognize. The Maxwells now know I own Pinecrest, I explained. Ahead of schedule. Ah. Emily nodded understanding. And how did the dragon lady take it? Currently, regrouping in her cave, preparing for the next assault, I replied, earning a laugh from my guest services director, though Richard seems genuinely impressed, which was unexpected. And the gala revelation we had planned? I considered the question, mentally adjusting strategies as I would have for a mission that had encountered unexpected variables. We proceed. As planned, but with modifications. The family knows my ownership position, but the significance of what that means, especially regarding the gala itself, is still to come. Emily nodded. I'll update the team. And just so you know, the governor's office confirmed his attendance for Christmas Eve. Senators Mitchell and Blackburn as well. This was excellent news from a business perspective. The annual gala had become not just a signature resort event, but a gathering that attracted political and business leaders from across the region, a fact that would undoubtedly interest Gloria, given her obsession with social positioning. Perfect. Make sure they're seated at promising tables, I instructed, the familiar rhythm of operational planning centering me. The governor appreciates being close enough to the music to enjoy it, but not so close that conversation becomes difficult. And Senator Mitchell always wants a clear view of the mountains through the main windows. Already arranged, Emily confirmed. Oh, and that special request you made? The historical display? It's been completed and will be unveiled during the cocktail hour before dinner. I smiled at this confirmation. The historical display was a carefully curated exhibition showing Pinecrest's evolution from my grandmother's modest inn to the current luxury resort, complete with photographs, architectural drawings, and key milestones in the property's development. It had been planned as part of my ownership revelation, but now would serve as a more comprehensive statement about the journey that had created Pinecrest. Thank you, Emily. That will be perfect. As she departed to continue preparations, James appeared from the direction of our private quarters, his expression a mixture of concern and amusement. Mom's on the warpath, he informed me without preamble. She's making calls to her social network, apparently trying to verify the resort's ownership structure and your role in it. I laughed despite myself. She thinks I'm lying? I think she's hoping to find evidence that you're exaggerating. Perhaps a silent partner or family money that actually funded the development. Anything to maintain her narrative that you couldn't possibly have built this yourself. She's welcome to investigate, I replied calmly. The ownership structure is straightforward. Reynolds Holdings, LLC owns Pinecrest Resort. I am the sole member of Reynolds Holdings. No investors, no partners, no family money beyond my grandmother's original property. James shook his head in amazement. You know, when you lay it out like that, it's pretty damn impressive. Most people would have sold the original inn for a decent profit and moved on. Most people didn't have a grandmother who taught them that building something meaningful requires vision and stubborn determination, I countered. Besides, I made a promise to her that I'd protect what she built and make it thrive. Military honor takes promises seriously. My husband studied me with the thoughtful expression I'd first been drawn to years ago. The look that suggested he was seeing beneath superficial layers to something essential. You've more than fulfilled that promise. And watching my mother recalibrate her entire worldview regarding you is an unexpected Christmas bonus. The recalibration is still in progress, I reminded him. Your mother isn't known for graceful concession. True. Which is why I came to warn you. She's requested a private dinner with just the immediate family tonight. No resort staff present except for food service. She's positioning it as intimate family time, but it's actually an opportunity to re-establish control in a setting where I don't have the home field advantage of being visibly in charge, I finished for him. Classic tactical maneuver when losing ground. Retreat to terrain where you can dictate terms. James smiled. You really do see everything as a military operation, don't you? It's served me well so far, I pointed out. Both in Afghanistan and in dealing with your mother. Should we decline the private dinner? I considered the question carefully, weighing options as I would any strategic decision. No. Declining would appear defensive. We'll attend, but with appropriate preparation. What kind of preparation? James asked, a note of wariness entering his voice. Nothing dramatic, I assured him. Just ensuring that Gloria's attempt to reassert control doesn't succeed. After all, I spent years learning to identify and neutralize threats in hostile territory. Your mother may be formidable, but she's considerably less dangerous than the situations I handled in uniform. Don't underestimate her, James warned, only half joking. She once got the governor's wife removed from the symphony board over a seating arrangement dispute. Noted, I replied with a smile. But unlike the governor's wife, I own the ground. We're standing on. That changes the tactical landscape considerably. The private family dinner Gloria had arranged took place in the Aspen Suites dining area, strategically removed from the resort's public spaces where I regularly exercised authority. The table had been beautifully set with the Maxwell family's personal china and silver, which Gloria had apparently brought along specifically for this purpose. A pointed reminder of family legacy and tradition in which I had no natural part. I thought something familiar would make our Christmas celebration more intimate, Gloria explained as we gathered, her tone suggesting thoughtful consideration rather than tactical positioning. These settings have been used for Maxwell family holidays for 3 generations. They're lovely, I acknowledged, recognizing the hand-painted pattern from previous family gatherings at the Maxwell estate. Though the resort could have provided comparable settings if you'd mentioned your preference. Nothing compares to family heirlooms, dear, Gloria countered smoothly. There's a certain provenance that can't be purchased, only inherited. The subtle dig at my self-made status versus the Maxwell family's generational wealth wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Richard looked vaguely uncomfortable, while Madeline and David exchanged knowing glances. The twins, required to surrender, their phones for this special family dinner, looked alternately bored and intrigued by the adult tension. Not everyone is fortunate enough to inherit China, Mother, James noted, his voice light but pointed. Some of us inherit more substantial legacies, like the determination and vision to build something meaningful from modest beginnings. Gloria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, darling. I was merely observing that family traditions carry special significance during the holidays. Dinner proceeded with the first course, a butternut squash soup that I recognized as Chef Marcel's creation despite Gloria's implication that she had arranged the entire meal privately. The resort's executive chef was too professional to refuse a guest's request, but I made a mental note to thank him later for his diplomacy in navigating the uncomfortable position Gloria had placed him in. I've been reflecting on today's revelations, Gloria began once everyone was served. and I realize there may have been some miscommunication over the years regarding Sarah's professional achievements. The calculated understatement almost made me choke on my soup. 10 years of deliberate minimization and dismissal reduced to some miscommunication was classic Gloria, acknowledging just enough to appear reasonable while avoiding any genuine accountability. Miscommunication suggests unintentional misunderstanding, Mother, James countered, his patience visibly thinning. Your consistent dismissal of Sarah's career has been quite deliberate. That's unfair, James, Gloria protested with well-practiced wounded dignity. I've always supported Sarah's interests. I simply prioritized her integration into our family circle, which naturally requires certain social commitments incompatible with constant work obligations. Integration that apparently didn't include Christmas celebrations, Madeline muttered, earning a sharp look from her mother. As I explained, that was an unfortunate misunderstanding, Gloria insisted. I merely suggested that Sarah's work commitments seemed to take precedence over family gatherings, which raised questions about priorities. You didn't suggest, Mother. You explicitly uninvited me, I corrected calmly. Your exact words were, "The holidays are for family, and while you're technically family on paper, your constant work excuses make it clear where your priorities lie." Gloria waved a dismissive hand. You're being overly literal, Sarah. I was simply expressing disappointment about your frequent absences. I have the text message if you'd like me to read it verbatim, I offered, maintaining my composure through years of practice dealing with hostile situations. It was quite specific about my not being welcome at the family Christmas gathering. The table fell silent, except for the uncomfortable shifting of silverware against china. Richard studied his soup with sudden fascination, while the twins watched the exchange with undisguised interest. Well, Gloria finally said, her voice artificially bright. Perhaps I expressed myself poorly in a moment of frustration. Water under the bridge now that we understand your work commitments were actually substantial responsibilities rather than convenient excuses. The backhanded acknowledgement that my career only became legitimate in her eyes once she discovered I owned a multi-million-dollar property rather than simply managed it was so perfectly Gloria that I almost admired the consistency. Almost. My responsibilities haven't changed, I pointed out. Only your perception of them. And perception is so important, isn't it? Gloria replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Which makes me wonder why you maintained such secrecy about your ownership position when clarity might have prevented so many misunderstandings. Professional boundaries aren't secrecy, I countered, and I'm not in the habit of using personal wealth or position to demand respect. I prefer to earn it through demonstrated capability. An admirable philosophy, Richard interjected, clearly attempting to diffuse tension. Especially in today's business environment where inherited advantage often substitutes for genuine accomplishment. Gloria's expression suggested Richard had just committed spousal betrayal of the highest order. Familiar connections provide important foundations, Richard, as your own father's introductions certainly did for your early architectural career. Richard had the grace to look slightly abashed at this reminder of his own privileged beginnings, but maintained his position. Foundations matter, certainly, but what's built upon them is the true measure of success. Sarah has built something remarkable here, largely through her own efforts. The unexpected support from my father-in-law shifted the dynamic at the table. For a decade, Richard had been a mostly passive presence in family interactions, deferring to Gloria's social orchestration, while he focused on his architectural practice. This direct contradiction of his wife's narrative represented a significant departure from established patterns. Gloria, ever the tactical thinker, recognized the need to regroup. Of course she has, she agreed with manufactured enthusiasm. And, now that we understand the full scope of Sarah's accomplishments, we can properly integrate her business success into the family's overall portfolio of interests. The Maxwell name carries significant influence in the right circles. And there it was, the pivot I'd been expecting. Unable to dismiss my success any longer, Gloria was now attempting to absorb it into the Maxwell family identity, positioning my independent achievement as ultimately benefiting the family brand. The presumption was so breathtaking in its entitled audacity that I found myself momentarily speechless. James, however, had no such constraint. Mother, Pinecrest is Sarah's business. It has nothing to do with the Maxwell name or family interests. She built it independently, and it remains independent. Gloria's expression flickered momentarily before she regained her composure. James, darling, everything connected to the Maxwell family ultimately reflects on our collective interests. Sarah is a Maxwell by marriage after all? I'm a Reynolds Maxwell, I corrected quietly but firmly. And Pinecrest operates under Reynolds Holdings, as it has since my grandmother's time. The significance of my hyphenated surname, something Gloria had always conveniently abbreviated, in introductions, hung in the air. I had maintained both names professionally and personally, honoring my own family legacy even while joining James's. Semantics, dear, Gloria dismissed with a wave. The point is that now that we understand the full picture, we can properly leverage these connections. Richard knows several developers who would be interested in expansion possibilities. Perhaps a Pinecrest location in Aspen or Vail? The Maxwell Foundation could host its annual retreat at the properties, creating valuable cross-promotion. The presumption left me momentarily speechless. In the span of a single day, Gloria had transitioned, from dismissing my career to attempting to co-opt it without so much as acknowledging the decade of condescension that preceded this moment. Mother? James intervened, his voice carrying a warning tone I rarely heard him use with family. You need to stop. Sarah doesn't need the Maxwell name or connections to succeed. She's demonstrated that conclusively. Pinecrest is her achievement, not a new property for you to incorporate into your social portfolio. For perhaps the first time in our decade-long relationship, I witnessed Gloria Maxwell genuinely speechless. Her perfectly composed facade cracked momentarily, revealing a confused hurt that seemed almost childlike in its authenticity. I'm simply trying to support Sarah's success, she finally managed, though the usual confidence had drained from her voice. Isn't that what family does? Support doesn't begin with a decade of dismissal followed by attempted appropriation when the success becomes too substantial to ignore, I replied, keeping my tone measured despite my frustration. True support would have meant respecting my choices and achievements regardless of their scale or alignment with your expectations. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. The twins exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing a family dynamic shift they didn't fully understand, but recognized as significant. Richard studied his wineglass with unusual intensity, while Madeline and David maintained careful neutrality. Perhaps, Richard finally said, his voice carrying the measured thoughtfulness that had made him a successful mediator in business contexts. We should acknowledge that perceptions and relationships can evolve over time. The past decade has established certain patterns that may not serve us well moving forward, given new understandings. This diplomatic framing, essentially suggesting a reset without requiring Gloria to explicitly acknowledge her past behavior, offered a potential path forward. The question was whether Gloria would recognize the opportunity or continue insisting on her narrative control. For several long moments, she seemed to be waging an internal battle between pride and pragmatism. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a carefully modulated blend of dignity and concession. I may have underestimated certain aspects of Sarah's professional commitments, she acknowledged, the closest thing to an apology her pride would permit, and perhaps my expectations regarding family involvement have been somewhat traditional. From Gloria, this qualified admission represented significant ground conceded. I recognized it would be the most explicit acknowledgement I was likely to receive, and pressing for more would only entrench defensive positions rather than allow for genuine evolution. I appreciate that, Gloria, I replied simply. And I recognize that family traditions and connections hold genuine value, even if I've approached them differently than you might have expected. The tentative olive branch seemed to ease some of the tension at the table. The next course arrived. A beautifully presented rack of lamb that again betrayed Chef Marcel's hand despite Gloria's implication of private catering, providing a welcome distraction from the emotional intensity. Conversation gradually shifted to safer territory. The twins' school activities, Madeline's work with the family foundation, Richard's latest architectural project. The undercurrents remained, but the immediate crisis of family narrative had reached, if not resolution, at least a temporary ceasefire. As dessert was served, a traditional Maxwell family bread pudding recipe that Gloria had apparently provided. To the kitchen staff, Richard unexpectedly raised his wine glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his expression thoughtful. "To new understandings and appreciations within our family, and specifically to Sarah, whose vision and determination have created something truly extraordinary here at Pinecrest." The simple acknowledgement from my father-in-law carried a weight that surprised me. For years, I had told myself that the Maxwells' approval or understanding didn't matter, that my accomplishments stood on their own merits regardless of their recognition. Yet Richard's straightforward appreciation affected me more deeply than I had anticipated. "To Sarah," James echoed immediately, his eyes conveying pride and something more complex. Perhaps relief that his family was finally seeing what he had recognized a decade ago. Even Gloria joined the toast, though her expression suggested she was still processing the fundamental recalibration of family dynamics this Christmas visit had initiated. "To Sarah," she echoed, "and to family connections, however unconventionally they may develop." The qualification was pure Gloria, unable to fully relinquish her narrative control even in concession, but the acknowledgement itself represented progress I wouldn't have thought possible 24 hours earlier. After dinner concluded, the family dispersed throughout the suite. The twins retreated to their room to reconnect with their phones, while Madeline and David settled by the fireplace with after-dinner drinks. Gloria excused herself to make a few important calls, though whether these were legitimate social obligations or a tactical retreat to regroup remained unclear. Richard lingered at the table, studying me with thoughtful consideration. "You know," he said when we were relatively alone, "Gloria's behavior, while inexcusable in many ways, comes from a place of genuine conviction about family legacy and position. It's been the organizing principle of her entire life." "I understand." "That," I acknowledged, "which is why I've maintained patience through years of subtle undermining. But understanding doesn't require accepting dismissal or disrespect." "No, it certainly doesn't," Richard agreed. "And I should have intervened more directly years ago rather than allowing Gloria's perspective to dominate family interactions." He hesitated, then added, "Military service, property development, resort management. These weren't the background we expected for James's wife, but they've clearly produced someone of remarkable capability and character." The sincere acknowledgement from my usually reserved father-in-law caught me off guard. "Thank you, Richard. That means a great deal coming from you." "You've created something exceptional here, Sarah," he continued, gesturing to encompass not just the suite, but the entire resort beyond. "Not just a successful business, but a legacy worthy of your grandmother's foundation. I think sometimes Gloria has difficulty recognizing achievements that don't align with her particular vision of success. While you've built your career recognizing good design in its many forms," I observed. Richard smiled slightly. "Architecture teaches you to appreciate different approaches to creating something meaningful and lasting. Though I must admit, I was as guilty as Gloria of underestimating what you were building here. The difference is that I can acknowledge my error without it threatening my self-conception." This insight into Gloria's psychology, that fully acknowledging, My success would require her to reconsider fundamental aspects of her identity and value system, helped me understand her resistance from a more compassionate perspective without diminishing my frustration with how it had manifested over the years. The Christmas Eve Gala. The following evening transformed the resort's grand hall into a winter wonderland that even Gloria couldn't help but admire. Crystal and silver decorations caught the light from thousands of white bulbs, while arrangements of evergreen and white roses created a sophisticated backdrop for the black tie affair. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the snow-covered mountains illuminated by a full moon, nature providing the most spectacular backdrop imaginable. As host and owner, I greeted guests in a simple black gown that Gloria had once dismissed as adequate for someone with your athletic build, now paired with my grandmother's sapphires that had been recast into a contemporary setting. The contrast between traditional stones and modern design seemed fitting given the evening's significance. The Maxwell family made a striking entrance, Gloria resplendent in designer burgundy velvet that even I had to admit suited her perfectly. Her expression as she surveyed the gathering contained something I'd never witnessed before when regarding my professional world: genuine, if reluctant, respect. Governor Williams just arrived, I murmured to James as we watched his parents move through the crowd. And both senators are already here. Your mother seems to have noticed. Indeed, Gloria had paused mid-conversation, her attention caught by the arrival of the state's highest-ranking political figure, someone she had spent years attempting to cultivate through charity connections and social maneuvering. The governor, however, was making a direct line toward me. "Sarah Reynolds," he called warmly as he approached. "The most dedicated officer I ever had the privilege of deploying with, and now the creator of this magnificent establishment. You continue to impress." The connection, which Gloria couldn't possibly have known, was that Governor Williams had been Colonel Williams during my first Afghanistan deployment, commanding the base where my engineering unit had been stationed. Our paths had crossed, again during his campaign when he'd sought my support for veteran initiatives, rekindling a professional respect that had evolved into periodic collaboration on military family programs. "Governor," I greeted him warmly, "thank you for making time during the holiday season. Your support means a great deal." "Wouldn't miss it," he assured me. "Catherine insisted this was the only acceptable venue for our family Christmas retreat. Says your Veterans Employment Program is the model for the entire region." The reference to the resort's initiative, hiring and training military veterans for hospitality careers, was a point of particular pride. Over 30% of Pinecrest's staff had military backgrounds, their discipline and adaptability making them exceptional team members once trained for civilian hospitality roles. I noticed Gloria watching our interaction with thinly veiled astonishment. The realization that I had connections to the governor that preceded and transcended her careful social maneuvering represented yet another recalibration of her understanding of my position and influence. The historical display Emily had arranged was unveiled during the cocktail hour, a beautifully curated exhibition showing Pinecrest's evolution from my grandmother's modest 12-room inn to the current world-class resort. Photographs documented each phase of development, while architectural drawings and building permits revealed the methodical expansion that had transformed the property over 8 years. Central to the display was a striking photograph of my grandmother, standing proudly before the original structure, her expression conveying the same determined spirit that had inspired my own path. Beside it, a picture of me in my Army Corps uniform during the first phase of renovation provided visual connection between military precision and business development. The Maxwell family gathered around the display along with other interested guests. Gloria studied each image with uncharacteristic silence, her expression unreadable as she absorbed the visual evidence of what I had built from such modest beginnings. "Your grandmother would be immensely proud," Richard commented, genuine appreciation evident in his voice. "Not just of the business success, but of how you've honored her vision while creating something uniquely your own." "Remarkable transformation," Senator Mitchell agreed, having joined our group at the display. The economic impact on the region has been substantial, from what my staff tells me. Over 200 local jobs created, I understand. 237 direct employees and approximately 400 indirect positions through vendor relationships and service providers, I confirmed. We've prioritized local sourcing and regional partnerships wherever possible. And the Veterans Employment Initiative is something we'd like to see replicated statewide, the governor added. Sarah's demonstrated that military precision and attention to detail translate extraordinarily well to luxury hospitality when properly channeled. I caught James watching me with undisguised pride as these accomplished individuals, political and business leaders Gloria had spent decades cultivating, spoke of my achievements with genuine respect and admiration. The contrast between this reality and the dismissive narrative Gloria had maintained for years couldn't have been more pronounced. As dinner was announced and guests began moving toward their assigned tables, Gloria approached me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Your grandmother," she said, gesturing toward the photograph in the display. "She built the original property herself?" "Yes," I confirmed. "After my grandfather died unexpectedly, leaving her with limited resources. The local bank refused her a business loan, suggesting she sell to a male investor instead. I allowed myself a small smile. She proved them wrong, just as I've continued to do." Something shifted in Gloria's expression, a momentary flash of what might have been recognition, or perhaps even reluctant kinship. "Determined women often face unexpected resistance," she observed, the comment carrying layers of potential meaning. "They do," I agreed simply. "The difference," Gloria continued, her voice carrying an unusual note of reflection, "is that some of us fight to secure established positions within existing structures, while others build entirely new foundations when the existing ones prove unwelcoming." The observation, acknowledging both her approach to social positioning and my creation of an independent business success, represented perhaps the most insightful thing Gloria had ever said regarding our fundamental differences, different strategies for different circumstances, I suggested, both requiring certain kinds of courage. Gloria nodded, the gesture carrying a hint of the mutual respect that had been entirely absent from our previous decade of interaction. "Indeed, though I must admit your approach has yielded impressive results." Coming from Gloria Maxwell, this qualified acknowledgement constituted high praise indeed. Before I could respond, the dinner chime sounded, and guests began moving toward their assigned tables. As James and I took our positions at the host table, I surveyed the grand hall filled with hundreds of guests celebrating Christmas Eve in night. The space my grandmother had once envisioned and I had brought to reality. The Maxwell family was seated prominently near the front. Gloria, between the governor and a prominent real estate developer, exactly the social positioning she valued most highly. "Mission accomplished?" James murmured, following my gaze to his. "Family's table?" "Beyond initial objectives," I confirmed with a small smile, "though I suspect your mother is already developing new strategies for navigating this adjusted reality." "Undoubtedly," he agreed. "But the fundamental dynamic has shifted permanently. You're no longer the career-obsessed wife who prioritizes work over family obligations in her narrative. Now I'm the successful business owner who prioritizes work over family obligations," I corrected with dry humor. "Progress, but qualified." James laughed. "Rome wasn't built in a day, Captain. Neither was Pinecrest Resort. Some transformations require time and sustained effort." As I stood to welcome the assembled guests to the Christmas Eve gala, I caught Gloria watching me with an expression that contained something new. Not quite approval, certainly not surrender, but perhaps the beginning of genuine respect. After a decade of dismissal and condescension, even this qualified recognition represented a Christmas miracle of sorts. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, addressing the gathered guests, "welcome to Pinecrest Mountain Resort's annual Christmas Eve Gala. My grandmother once told me that building something meaningful requires vision, determination, and the courage to stand your ground when others doubt your capabilities. I raised my glass, including the entire room but finding Gloria's gaze specifically, to standing your ground, building your vision, and finding unexpected understanding in the process. Happy holidays to you all. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button right now. Each week I share inspiring stories of resilience and unexpected triumph that remind us all that standing your ground and staying true to your vision is always worth it, even when the people who should support you the most are the ones who understand you the least. Next week, I'll be sharing how a single decision I made during military training changed the entire trajectory of my career and ultimately led to the success I've built today. Don't miss it. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand your ground against someone who underestimated your potential. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the most satisfying success is the kind that forces others to reconsider their assumptions about what you're capable of achieving.